You know that moment when you realize that you're not crazy? That happened to me recently when I put out this post on my community page and on Twitter. I asked people to help me compile a list of every time they ever saw this symbol referenced in popular culture. That, of course, being the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. Between YouTube and Twitter, I got over 1,000 comments, which is far and away the biggest response I've ever gotten to a social media post. Like all of you, I continuously see the Ouroboros symbol pop up everywhere, especially in the video game medium, where it will show up even when I'm not purposefully looking for it. But why does this happen? What is it about this symbol that is so numinous, that works of fiction are motivated to use it so often? I'm sure some of you watching this video already know some of the meaning behind the Ouroboros, that it symbolizes the nature of time. Others, who maybe have watched my videos for a while, know that it's arguably the most famous symbol in alchemy. But in preparing for this video, I found that the Ouroboros has an even richer symbolism and history than I could have ever expected. With that said, I want to unveil some of the deeper mysteries behind this symbol and, in turn, link it to a variety of popular media. Before I do, make sure to hit that like button if you like this video, and also make sure to subscribe. I'm trying to see if I can hit 500,000 subscribers before the end of September, so we can maybe have a big celebration on the channel. Now, with that down, let's start by going over the history of the Ouroboros symbol. The earliest known depiction of the snake eating its own tail comes from the 14th century BC in ancient Egypt, in the tomb of King Tutankhamun. On the walls of his tomb are a series of hieroglyphs commonly referred to as the enigmatic Book of the Netherworld, which describes the journey of the sun god Ra to the Netherworld, where he is united with Osiris, the god of the afterlife and rebirth. The Ouroboros appears twice in these hieroglyphs, one surrounding Ra's head and the other surrounding his feet. Now naturally, because the text is titularly and literally enigmatic, the definitive purpose of these Ouroboroses is lost, but there are a number of reasonable interpretations. One Egyptologist, Jan Assmann, says that the symbol refers to the mystery of cyclical time, which flows back into itself. This makes sense, because this is probably the most universal understanding of the Ouroboros symbol in general, but still questions remain. The most pertinent one being, why a serpent? One potential answer comes from one of the earliest historians of Egyptian hieroglyphics, Ouroboros, who wrote a treatise called Hieroglyphica in the 5th century AD. According to Ouroboros, when the Egyptians would represent the universe, they delineate a serpent bespeckled with variegated scales, devouring its own tail. Moreover, it every year puts off its old age with its skin. As in the universe, the annual period affects a corresponding change, and becomes renovated. And the making use of its own body for food implies that all things whatsoever that are generated by divine providence in the world undergo a corruption into it again. With this quote, Ouroboros links the process of a snake shedding its skin to the continuous death and renewal that the universe goes through. Unlike a typical snake that can shed its skin and still die, the Ouroboros can do this continuously, because it is both the source of its life and its destruction, hence its ability to eat itself while remaining alive. Based on this, I assume, though I'm not sure, that this extends to Egyptian snake gods in general. Seriously, the Egyptians had more snake gods than Xenoblade Chronicles had side quests. As for which snake god these two are, the most common interpretation I found is that it is Mehen, who protected the sun god Ra as he descended daily to be united in the netherworld with Osiris, only to rise again. Naturally, the union of two opposites, in this case the sun with darkness, parallels the union of life and death in the Ouroboros. Still, it's not obvious why Mehen would represent the universe. If I were to guess, maybe Mehen, like the other snake gods, are the offspring of the snake god Knef, which German Egyptologist Hermann Kies describes as, quote, the most ancient deity of the prehistoric world. Now my reasoning for that is based on the second most ancient source of the Ouroboros, ancient Greece. Speculations about and usage of the Ouroboros symbol go as far back as Plato in the 4th century BC. According to Russian religious scholar Dmitriy Leonard, Plato gave an inadvertent yet simultaneously the most detailed description of the Ouroboros in the Timaeus being Plato's famous dialogue surrounding how the universe came to be. According to Plato, the demiurge, not the Gnostic one, created the cosmos in such a way that it was made to move in the same manner and on the same spot, within his own limits revolving around a circle. This represents the Ouroboros' nature of the universal cycle of time and space as being self-absorbed and self-sufficient. Returning to the Timaeus. Of design, he was created thus, his own waste providing his own food, and all that he did or suffered taking place in and by himself. Granted, while Plato didn't refer to the cosmos as the Ouroboros in the Timaeus, the traits he described did eventually culminate in the rebirth, pun intended, of the Ouroboros symbol in Greek culture. Two key forms I want to cite come from early Greek alchemy and the beginnings of Christian Gnosticism. I'll address the latter first. One of the most famous texts from the Gnostic tradition, the Pistis Sophia, describes the void of space, the outer darkness, as a great dragon whose tail is in his mouth, outside the whole world and surrounding the whole world. This notion carries over to the Gnostic sect known as the Ophites, with their famous Ophite diagram. Notice the Ouroboros snake. It separates the known universe at the time from the heavens above. In respect to Greek alchemy, one of the most famous depictions of the Ouroboros comes from Cleopatra the Alchemist. Though she lived in the 3rd century AD, her most notable work is one that appeared to be written in the 11th century, yet was nonetheless attributed to her. This was the Chrysopoeia of Cleopatra, a single sheet of paper with various alchemical symbols written on it. Note its depiction of the Ouroboros. The text in the middle, as well as the text in this double circle, describe the Ouroboros' nature. The first translates to the all is one, which is a phrase that might sound pretty familiar to you Fullmetal Alchemist fans.
One is all, and all is one.
The second text translates as follows. One is the serpent, which has its poison according to 2 compositions. And one is all, and through it is all, and by it is all. And if you have not all is nothing. Now, as for what this has to do with the Egyptian tendency to link serpents to the universe, it is from the one that the all emerges. In other words, it is from the state of oneness, of perfect harmony and wholeness, that the universe, the all, emerges in its totality. It is from the Ouroboros as one that the Ouroboros as all emerges, and then theoretically returns to itself. Cleopatra's black and white illustration symbolizes this well. All of life and all of its opposing elements are held within this state of oneness, and those opposites are represented by the black and white colors. Appropriately, the psychoanalyst Erich Neumann draws a parallel between the Ouroboros and the Chinese Taoist concept of Tai Chi. Quote, "The container of opposites is the Chinese Tai Chi, a round containing black and white, day and night, heaven and earth, male and female. Lao Tzu, one of the formational figures of Taoism, says of it, there was something formless yet complete that existed before heaven and earth, without sound, without substance, dependent on nothing, unchanging, all-pervading, unfailing." It should also be noted that a common interpretation of this symbol, the yin-yang, is that the line that separates the two of them is a snake. There is further proof of the cross-cultural tendency to link concepts and traits like time, eternity, the unity of opposites, and the universe to snakes and the Ouroboros. One of the more recent examples, quote-unquote, is the world serpent in Norse mythology, Jormungandr. In the prose Edda, it is described as surrounding the whole earth and biting its own tail. In Hinduism, there is Shesha. Like Kneph in Egyptian mythology, Shesha is also a primordial creator god. The name Shesha, translated from Sanskrit, means he who remains, because when the world is destroyed at the end of each kalpa, a Hinduist-Buddhist measurement of time lasting 4.32 billion years, Shesha is the only entity that carries over into the next kalpa. Though most of my Western brethren might not recognize Shesha from any traditional Hindu depiction, you might recognize it from this pause screen from the video game Metal Gear Solid 2. This is a depiction of Shesha in Ouroboric form from a book published in 1822, called Beliefs, Knowledge, and Art of the Ancient Hindus. It supports the 21 worlds of Hindu mythology, just as the Ouroboros birthed and supported the known universe in Gnosticism, as well as Egyptian mythology. Just as the Ouroboros is pervasive throughout pop culture, the same is true for world religion, and in every case I could find, it represented the same qualities and traits. It is a symbol for the universe and the nature of time. It is both the void of space and the state of oneness that existed before time and space. It is a symbol for the source from which everything emerged and to which everything will return. And it is within that source that all of life's opposites are paradoxically united. Now I would like to take a general look at some depictions of the Ouroboros, and because video games are my specialty on this channel, I will be taking exclusively from them. If you want some examples from movies and television, refer to the list compiled in the description box below. The most famous example, arguably, is the Ouroboros virus from Resident Evil 5, which takes the form of a black goo, made up of several slithering appendages that one could describe as either tentacles or snakes. The blackness of the Ouroboros, of course, is analogous to the black void of space, and the serpentine nature of the Ouroboros virus refers to the spirit that underlies that void, as well as its self-sufficient and self-sustaining quality. There are multiple other games that depict the Ouroboros in almost the exact same way. One includes Hollow Knight, where Void, in its literal form, emerges forward in the form of tentacles/snakes. Another is with the Death Stranding series. The tar currents in both those games are a black void-like substance, and from them emerge various characters that often have either serpentine qualities or tentacles. This association of snakes with the dark void extends to the video game Elden Ring, with an entity known as the Abyssal Serpent. Though this isn't confirmed, I theorize that just like the various Egyptian snake gods emerged from Knef, the various snake gods of Elden Ring, like Igle and the god-devouring serpent, emerged from the Abyssal Serpent. Another game that seems to operate on the same metaphysical principle is one that was made by the same developer of Elden Ring, Dark Souls. In Dark Souls 1, there are the primordial serpents known as Kingseeker Frampt and Darkstalker Koth. Both emerge from a formless void. Finally, in the Xenosaga games, a tech organization known as Vector Industries uses the void of space to facilitate an intergalactic communication system known as the Unus Mundus Network. The symbol for this network, appropriately, is the Ouroboros. Now, while these examples provide a decent representation of the Ouroboros' established meanings, it still doesn't really address the symbol's power. Why it holds such psychological sway over us that it appears everywhere. To explain this, I will home in on two of the symbol's standard meanings. The first is its symbolism of time. There are a few games that have tried to depict the cyclical nature of time, where there is no definitive beginning or end. Before I outline what those are, I am going to issue a spoiler warning. All the games you see on screen now are going to have elements of their story spoiled. The games will be marked by time codes in the description box below, so if you want to learn about some games but not others, you can jump between them. You have been warned. The first example of Ouroboros as a symbol of time comes from the Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver 2. The final fight in that game takes place between two separate incarnations of the same character named Raziel. One is a past version, and the other is a future version that looks like an emaciated wraith. When the wraith version stabs the other with a sword known as the Soul Reaver, the soul of the past Raziel enters it. When this happens, the wraith Raziel realizes that the Soul Reaver blade he had been carrying up until this point, ever since the first Soul Reaver game, has always contained his soul. Thus, he is stuck in a time loop that he can't escape. And this death occurs in an arena with the Ouroboros symbol on the ground. The next example comes from Life is Strange. In that game, the main character Max is gifted the power to turn back time. Unfortunately, repeated use of this power has led to destabilization in the fabric of reality. And one consequence of that is that an EF6 tornado threatens to destroy the town she lives in, along with everybody in it. If she wishes to stop this, she has to go back in time to the first time she ever used her power and stop herself. Unfortunately, this would result in her friend Chloe being murdered by a disturbed young man named Nathan. In the moment that Max chooses to either save Chloe or the town, Chloe is wearing the symbol of the Ouroboros on her shirt. If she chooses to let Chloe die, the game ends where it began. Like with Soul Reaver 2, time loops back to the beginning. Finally, though the symbol of the Ouroboros does not show up in the game Dragon's Dogma, the concept of time repeating and flowing back into itself is a fundamental part of that story. Unfortunately, to explain how and why would be too complicated for this video. However, if you want to learn more about that, you can check out my video on it, which I will link in the description box below. Now, the second standard meaning of the Ouroboros is that it is a symbol of transcendence. Take the aforementioned Resident Evil 5. The purpose of the Ouroboros virus was to facilitate the evolution of individuals with quote-unquote ideal genetics, so they could become literally perfect. To use alchemical terminology, the fully evolved individuals would become walking philosopher's stones, which is a term used by the character Excella.
Evolution. It's a philosopher's stone, one that will choose through DNA who shall proceed to the next stage.
The Ouroboros and the Philosopher's Stone are commonly used symbols by Capcom, the developers of Resident Evil, in their other franchises. One is in Devil May Cry 2. There is the international enterprise known as Ouroboros, obviously, but there's also the game's final boss known as Argosax. This boss takes two forms. One is a literal mound of chaos, with which one could draw a parallel to the concept of void and the Ouroboros. The other is the figure that emerges from Argosax's chaos form, known as the Despair Embodied. Now personally, I draw a parallel between this figure and the aforementioned Philosopher's Stone, and I do so for two key reasons. One is that the Despair Embodied is an androgynous hermaphroditic being, and the hermaphrodite was a common personified symbol of the Philosopher's Stone, the most famous example being the rebus. The other reason is that in order to create the Philosopher's Stone in alchemy, the first ingredient one must use is what they refer to as the prima materia, or first matter, and the first matter is the void of space, the Ouroboros, the chaos. The Ouroboros is the imperfect disunity of matter, and the Philosopher's Stone is the perfect unity of matter, and both are represented as paradoxical beings. The second Capcom game I will cite is the dreadfully underrated Haunting Ground. In one of the game's puzzles, you must align these blocks against the walls of this square-shaped room, which feature the alchemical symbols for the 4 classical elements on them. When you do this, you open up a passage in the floor, which is decorated with the Ouroboros symbol. In alchemy, another method one could theoretically use to create the Philosopher's Stone is to unite the 4 classical elements of earth, wind, fire, and water in perfect harmony. By doing this, one could theoretically achieve the 5th element, which is analogous to the Philosopher's Stone. The logic behind this, quote-unquote, again, emerges from Greek antiquity. In Plato's aforementioned Timaeus, it is stated that from the void of space, the Ouroboros, the first material elements to emerge were the 4 classical elements. Theoretically, if one could unite these 4 elements in such a way, one could recreate the source from which they emerge, that eternal life-giving source. Now, according to Plato's student, Aristotle, that source, the 5th element, is ether. The same is true for the Japanese elemental system, though they tend to refer to it as void. The question is, does the union of the elements produce the Philosopher's Stone or the Ouroboros, the perfect order or the imperfect chaos? The best way I can answer this is to ask you to think of the circumference of a perfect circle. It has a total of 360 degrees. Now let's assume that the Ouroboros, the beginning of all things, is 0. and the Philosopher's Stone, the perfect summation, is 360. Where is the 0 and where is 360? Right, they're both the same. They are the beginning and the end united. Just like the Ouroboros is a paradox that is difficult for the dualistic mind to visualize, the same is true for the Philosopher's Stone, which is also symbolized as a paradox. The point here is that the paradoxical nature of the Philosopher's Stone and the Ouroboros, the inability for the human mind to perceive them, are what make them numinous. It's what motivates human beings to use the symbol to illustrate transcendence. And as a symbol of transcendence, video games tend to associate it with great rewards. In the base game for Final Fantasy XVI, the most powerful armor set you can get is the Ouroboros armor. In Assassin's Creed 3, the entryway to the Grand Temple, a storehouse of infinite knowledge, is marked by the symbol of the Ouroboros and is unlocked by a key bearing this symbol as well. Outside of great rewards, the symbol can simply denote transcendence or actual deities. In Lies of P, the symbol for the Alchemist faction, appropriately, is the Ouroboros. In Bravely Default, the final boss is a god named Lord Ouroboros. And in Xenogears, the final boss is also a god, and their name is Ouroboros. To conclude, I want to emphasize one last aspect of the Ouroboros symbol that gives it such psychological power. The aforementioned Erich Neumann, in his book The Origins of History and Consciousness, explains that when trying to describe something transcendent, something that lies beyond the dualist constraints of the human mind, a variety of symbols will be used for hundreds, maybe thousands of years until the best elements from each one combine. When trying to describe a pre-conscious, pre-universe state, a state of perfection, wholeness, it was the symbolism of a snake, a perfect circle, void, and paradoxes that combined into one. That symbol of the Ouroboros reflects something we feel to be real, something that we used to be inside of but were separated off from once we developed consciousness. Yet nonetheless, we feel a psychic pull towards it because of that prior connection. We desire to feel that state of blissful oneness yet again, and that is why the Ouroboros shows up everywhere. This video features only a fraction of the number of times that the Ouroboros symbol shows up in fiction. If you want to see the full list I compiled, refer to the pinned comment below. And if you want to help contribute to the list, make sure to sound off by leaving a comment. Remember to like the video and subscribe, and until next time, remember to stay safe and stay yellow.